Good morning or good evening, afternoon, everyone, depending on what time of day you're listening to this. This is Mark Johnson, and I'm back with another episode of Astral Perceptions. Now, I know I haven't put out one of these episodes in a couple of months. I've intended to do these a lot more frequently, but as you know, life intervenes, and so I kind of had to put this on the back burner. I really wanted to think a lot more about the content of this show. Originally, I wanted to try to bring in more guests, but that's been a little complicated considering rounding up guests for our other show, the flagship show, Paranormal UK radio show here on the Paranormal UK radio network. And so I've mostly just come here by myself and talk about my thoughts and experiences and ideas of what is the true nature of our reality. Because as a researcher for the last 20-something years, I've really begun to see and understand that our nature of reality is wildly, wildly different than we think. We're pre-programmed pretty much from birth to look at reality in a certain way. And even as children, we're much more open and sensitive to the other aspects of our reality around us until, our society has it programmed out of us to ignore it, to say it's just our imaginations, and to move on with our regular life. So what is our regular life? Well, we're going to touch a little bit on that today. We're going to touch on some current events. Again, I try not to make this a political show, but there are some things that are going on that I don't consider political. I just consider that this is the reality and this is the way we need to look at it, in my opinion, and some suggestions on how to get through it. Because, let's face it, I don't think anybody is happy right now. And there is far too much hate and division that's going on right now when we really need to start looking at ourselves as one human family and looking at leading a more spiritual life. And part of that spiritual life is not pointing fingers, not blaming other people, not trying to shout people down or cancel out other thoughts or opinions. I'm totally against that. I'm also totally against forcing people to do something that they have every reason to not want to do. Now, again, I'll clarify that here momentarily. But again, I'm mostly going to focus on it from a spiritual perspective, from a consciousness perspective, and how we can get more in touch with our higher selves, our spiritual selves, and spirit in general. And I apologize for my throat. I'm actually recording this very early in the morning before my day job. So I'm still kind of waking up and I'm sitting here drinking my coffee and trying to clear my throat out here for you. So I'll apologize for that right up front. So it is October. We got Halloween coming up in about 10 days. Halloween, of course, being one of my favorite times of year for lots of various reasons, not only for the, spooky side of things, but also for, I just love this weather. I love this in between summer and winter, the fall, the leaves changing, the dryness of the air, the coolness of the air, but you still feel the warmth of the sun. Here in the east, the humidity has gone way down. And with the leaves falling and changing, everything's very, very beautiful. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I took a trip up to Lake Placid, New York, which was absolutely gorgeous. I was very surprised by it. And the leaves were changing a lot more up there than they were here. Now everything here is starting to change nicely. So it really is my favorite time of year. Yeah, but I also like the spookiness, the idea that, the veil between the physical world and the spiritual world supposedly comes together. I don't know if that's true or not, because I don't think that the Earth being at a certain tilt or the axis or being a certain area around the sun makes a difference on whether or not we're going to be closer to the spirit world or not. Because, I've done so many investigations over the years, and I've been able to capture evidence of spiritual activity any different time of the year. You name it, it's winter, summer, fall, day or night. It really makes no difference. Not in my experience, anyway. So I just enjoy this time of year. I used to be a very big horror movie fan when I was younger, and now most of what they put out these days, most of what, in my opinion, most movies they put out these days are garbage. And I'm talking as a film student, got my bachelor's degree in filmmaking, worked on several movies early in my career that none of you have ever heard of. And when I couldn't get into the film industry, I had to move on to other things and use my film skills to make some documentaries. And I do plan on moving forward here in the near future, making some paranormal and spiritual themed documentaries to talk about and showcase some of the things that we're doing here on this show and on our other shows here on the network. Things involving more of UFOs, and I'm very interested in what I call areas of high strangeness. Because where I live here in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, I've found at least 4 or 5 different hot spots where paranormal activity seems to be spiking compared to other areas just very close by. And I shy away more from the quote-unquote haunted house idea, although I think it does happen at times. But everything that I've experienced around here seems to involve the land, something on the land. I currently live in a little lake community. I'm up against the back of the not the National Forest, it's a wildlife preserve. There's no houses behind me. I see the woods. It's beautiful. I have all sorts of wildlife, deer, bear, foxes, raccoons, wild turkeys, you name it, they come through my yard. And I've been in this house for about over 6 years now, coming up on 7. And I've never really had any experiences in this house. It's very quiet, feels very normal. But yet there are 3 other locations where I've lived in and around this area of Sussex County, New Jersey, that have had a lot of activity. The first house I ever moved into was over in Vernon, up in Highland Lakes. And I lived in a small converted cabin for a few years. And that's where my paranormal journey really began, because I started experiencing things in that cabin. I was hearing my name being called. I would feel presences. I would see things out of the corner of my eye. And so I started filming with a video camera, and I caught some amazing footage of orbs. Now, again, most of us consider most orbs caught on camera to be nothing more than dust. Dust floats a few inches in front of a light on a camera. It's illuminated, and because it's so close to the lens, it blows up, looks like a big ball of light and just floating past the camera. That's what most orbs are. But in these cases, I would be catching these balls of light coming out of a wall at the far side of the room and then meandering its way across the floor, all the while streaming, getting larger in size as it would get closer, until it would fly past the camera. Or I'd get streaks go flying past me and making sharp right angles and going into a wall. And dust doesn't do that. It just doesn't. Dust floats on the air currents. And the camera focal point the focal point on a camera has a narrow range, so something either too close or too far away will be out of focus depending on the focus of that camera. Which, of course, shows me that it's not dust. Now, can I sit here and tell you what it is exactly? No, I don't know. I know it's some form of energy. In fact, there are many reports, everything from paranormal to ghosts to things in the woods to UFOs. They all take the shape of a ball of light or an orb of light. My brother and his family, they lived in a house in Colorado for a while that was right next to their old house. They just moved from one house to the other. They bought this other property higher up the hill. And while on their old property, they had nothing going on. Yet they moved about a couple hundred yards up the hill, and they started having all sorts of different experiences. My nephews would see apparitions of a man walking down the hallway. They would see outside in broad daylight large basketball-sized balls of light that would go floating past the window, or they'd watch them moving around the property, meandering around, had no idea what they were. If I had to venture a guess, it was some type of form of natural energy, and more than likely an intelligent energy. My other brother, one time, he stayed there and woke up in the middle of the night, and he saw on the mountain behind the house was brightly lit up, and there was a figure standing at the top of the mountain. And instead of freaking out and waking everybody up, he watched it for a minute, then went right back to sleep, which is actually very common in these kinds of situations. We don't react the way we think we would normally react. The same happened to me in this first house. It was the only time in my life I ever experienced sleep paralysis. Now, the scientific and medical community tries to explain away sleep paralysis as the brain releases a chemical to keep you from moving around in your sleep, and sometimes the mind wakes up before the body is ready and you feel paralyzed, whatever. I'm sorry, it's bullpucky. Don't believe a word of it, because the sleep paralysis that I experienced had an intelligence behind it. It would... The first time it happened to me, I woke up and it felt like this pressure was pushing me down in the bed. And I couldn't move. I wasn't afraid. I just knew something was going on. And I couldn't even speak, but I could think. And I'd ask whatever it's there, who are you? What are you doing? And all of a sudden the pressure would get even more intense, pushing me into the bed. And finally I'd say, enough, go away, leave me alone, go away. And after a few moments, the pressure would lift, and then I could suddenly move again. Now, again, you'd think I'd be jumping up. Some people say, I'd be scared to death. I'd be running. The mind doesn't work like that. Or there's something about the encounter that alters our perception, and I would just go right back to sleep. Now, some people would say, well, maybe you were dreaming. No, I was wide awake, absolutely wide awake. And I had these experiences 3 or 4 times. The last time it happened to me, it wasn't long before I left the house and moved in with my wife. I had just done a preliminary investigation of a house way down in Metuchen, New Jersey, about an hour and a half south of me. And I went with a couple of my team members. We did the preliminary, we talked to the client, whatever, and we came home. And I think this is going to be one and only time I think something followed me home. Otherwise, it was something else that was still around and attached to the land and the house. Because I woke up with sleep paralysis. I was lying there. I had just started falling asleep when I felt the pressure and sleep paralysis. And then I'd start hearing a voice speaking to me in my right ear. It was a man's voice, and it sounded urgent. but I couldn't make out what it was saying. All I knew was it was a voice, but my mind couldn't wrap my head around what it was saying. It wasn't like it was a different language. It was just I couldn't understand it. And so in my mind, I wasn't afraid. In my mind, I would just say, okay, slow down. I can't understand you. Slow down and try it again. Well, when I said this, whatever it was, seemed to get even more agitated and start talking faster and faster. And I couldn't get, understand anything that was being said. So I tried it again and I said, please slow down, calm down, and talk to me normally and let me see if I can understand you. And then this was more sensed in my third eye than it was, I didn't see this physically. Instead, I felt or sensed like whatever was there flew right up, got within an inch of my face, and was screaming as loud as it could in my face. Now, I didn't audibly hear anything. I didn't see anything. That was just a sensation I had. And whatever it was, I wouldn't call it hostile or negative. It was just angry and frustrated that I couldn't understand it. It couldn't communicate with me. But at that point, it kind of crossed the line. And in my head, I said, okay, you're out of here. I put up a white light of protection around me. And in my mind's eye, I grabbed at whatever it was and threw it out the window over my head. I pushed it away. And then after a minute, it subsided, sleep paralysis ended, and I was able to move again. And again, I wasn't freaked out or afraid. In fact, I very rarely have been freaked out or afraid in any of the investigations I've ever done. Maybe a little creeped out going down a corridor of an old abandoned asylum. But I could sit in a basement with all the lights off, doesn't bother me. I could walk around a cemetery in the middle of the night, and it doesn't bother me. I'm more afraid of running into a skunk or a bear than I am running into a ghost. These things just don't frighten me. And yet, that's when I also captured with my video camera what I call flying sock. That's my name for it anyway. When I was in my living room panning around, and I have this on my YouTube page, and I posted this a few times on my Facebook page, of using a white light camera. It wasn't even an infrared night vision camera, a white light camera, panning across, and all of a sudden this orb streaks across the room right in front of me. And I moved the camera back and forth a little bit to kind of like record the time when it happened. And as I passed the camera over to my left, something this long, about a foot long, bulbous, almost like a tadpole like thing flew out from under the rocking chair across the room and flew right past me into the doorway that led into the kitchen. And as it was flying past me, just as it's about to go out of frame, it starts going from a horizontal to a vertical position as it goes into the kitchen. Now, I saw this out of the corner of my eye. I was mostly looking at the view screen, but my peripheral vision did catch it going past me. One of the most amazing captures I've ever gotten. That's when I called the local paranormal team to come in and investigate. And while they were investigating, one of the investigators actually caught the same type of anomaly, which was fascinating. And I was so intrigued with it, I joined the group, and I was ghost hunting ever since. Then I formed my own group in 2005, North Jersey Paranormal Research. And the group has been kind of on hiatus the last several years, but we're still around, and I'm still doing my own types of investigations. Most of my team has gone off to do other things, and that's fine. That happens in life. But if I ever get an investigation, there are people I can call on, and we can go out and investigate. But I handle my investigations very differently now, not with just a bunch of equipment and seeing what we can capture, because I think it's very important to go off of your feelings and using your body and your third eye to try to sense and feel what's going on a location. Now, this house I lived in there was my wife, actually, who would become my wife. She started off as my friend. We lived next door to each other. And then things went on from there. And then eventually she became my wife. But she was having activity in her house over there, too. And when I moved in over there, we had a few things happen as well. Nothing major, but just some very, very odd things. One time we were laying in bed and she was talking about her grandmother who passed. And all of a sudden we looked up, and this is in the middle of the winter. So we have baseboard heat, so there's no air blowing. The ceiling fan was not on, and yet it was not moving a moment ago. But then when we looked up, the ceiling fan is slowly spinning, and it's spinning in the opposite direction of what it normally would. And it did that for about a minute, and then it stopped. Very, very interesting and intriguing. From there, we moved over to another section of Vernon. We bought a house in the Glenwood section. Now, Glenwood is in the northern part of the Vernon Township, right next to the New York State border. And it's on this mountain. There's this mountainside that most of the community is on. Now, a couple years before, I had done an investigation of a home that would wind up to be just a couple of streets away from where I bought my home. And we did an investigation that was probably one of the few almost negative investigations I've ever done. The family was terrified. The children were having nightmares every night. The mother, who she looked like she was just shell-shocked or like a war victim. She just looked so ragged by what she was dealing with. And something tried to push her down the stairs one time and just was freaked out. So I went over with one of my investigators to do a preliminary and just walk through, talk to her, get a feel for the place. And we had a lot of heavy activity. I started to feel almost like a panic attack, like my heart started racing. I was feeling intense anxiety, which I've never had happen. Well, I had happened one other time before, and then I recognized it for what it was. It was whatever was there was trying to get us to leave. Didn't want us there. My friend who was investigating with me, he at one point was downstairs trying to pick up some equipment before we left, and he got hit with some kind of electrical discharge, not a static electricity, but some electrical discharge hit him and knocked him back, scared the crap out of him. So when we walked outside, we're standing in the driveway talking before we leave, and whatever was inside the house was still outside the house, still pushing the anxiety, still pushing my racing heart. And I feel that was my body's reaction, letting me know that something was there, some kind of powerful entity was there trying to get us to leave. It wasn't until I got into my car and drove away that the feeling completely dissipated. Now, go figure, we came back a week later with a team, and I realized in hindsight, too damn many people. There were 8 of us in this smaller house. So it was too crowded, too much equipment, and nothing happened that night. I think if we would have come back with just maybe 1 or 2 of us, we might have had better results. And that's something that I've learned and changed as I move forward with any types of future investigations. Well, in talking with her, she mentioned that there were other houses around the neighborhood that had experienced activity. I didn't think much about it at the time. Then I moved into this house up the hill, up the mountain farther, a couple streets away. And the whole time I was in that house, about 3 years, we had a series of events that happened. First of all, we were trying to paint and renovate the house, and nothing we did to this house worked. Nothing seemed to work. The feel of the neighborhood was weird. None of the neighbors were friendly. And then we started to feel presences in the house. I would wake up in the middle of the night having that intense anxiety and the feeling like something was in the room with me. Very, very intense feeling. One time, my wife is standing in the bathroom, and there's a door to the hallway right next to her. I'm downstairs watching TV. Well, as she's doing her hair, as we were going to go out later, she sees what she thought was me but it was somebody walk out of her office, which is right across the hall from her, walk out of the office like it was carrying a box or something, and go walk past her and into the bedroom. So thinking it was me, she called out to me and say, "Hey, where are we going to go later?" Nothing. No response. So she called my name again. Nothing. She goes into the bedroom. There's nobody there. By this time, I'm downstairs, and I hear her calling my name in a very frightened voice. So I go running up the stairs, and I go, "What's the matter?" She goes, "Where have you been?" I go, "Downstairs this whole time." And then she told me what happened. She was absolutely freaked out. And then I just started to learn that whatever was around there was attached to the land, to the whole area. It wasn't just one house. Another location that really comes to mind that we spent many years researching was down in Bloomingdale, New Jersey, which is about a half hour south of me. And this is where we investigated 2 homes that were on the same street, that were on a hill overlooking the town of Butler. And right nearby is a park called Federal Hill that supposedly in the 1700s in the Revolutionary War, there was a mutiny amongst several of the Revolutionary War soldiers. They tried to mutiny or to desert, and they got caught and were hung. Now, some people would say, oh, well, maybe that's the cause of the activity. But there was also supposedly farmland there, and there was a big fire around the turn of the century, burned everything in Bloomingdale. And in the 1920s, they built tract houses up there. Well, in one of the houses that we were investigating, they said that supposedly when the house was being built, there was bones found in the backyard, and they thought they could have been Native American. I don't know. I'm trying to remember if they had ever called anybody at that time, the local museum or somebody to come. But this was the 1920s, and they really didn't care about things like that like they would today. So they ignored it. Well, we investigated these houses on numerous occasions. We caught a bunch of different types of activity and had experiences, everything from capturing lots of EVP, voices, laughter, whistling, even a voice speaking another language that almost sounded Native American, but I can't quite make it out. I even sent it to a Native American elder once, and they really had trouble understanding it. So, and the families were both being affected a lot by the activity there. Now, we actually had the television show Paranormal State come out, and they did an episode because they contacted us looking for cases. And not knowing any better at the time, I contacted my clients, asked them if they'd like to do it. They said, sure, fine. So the production came out, and what a production. Oh, my God, nothing low key about it at all. They took over the whole street with equipment trucks, lights. The one client, she was very afraid and wanted something very low key under the table, and that's not what she got. And then to make things worse, the show had a reputation later, I found out, about faking evidence and whatnot, and we had some things, they kind of screwed us over. They misrepresented evidence. They cut out, they were supposed to be doing both houses, and that was the name of the episode, Desperate Households, plural. Yet they cut out the other house from the episode because the client over there wasn't as frightened. The other client, she was scared to death, and that's what they wanted because fear sells. And they misrepresented stuff. I won't say they outright lied, but how everything was presented, it's enough that it's close enough to lying for me. And with both of these houses, they were experiencing activity for years, and we'd go back and do multiple investigations and started looking into it. And that's when we started to realize that it was the land and not the houses themselves that were haunted, or there was something going on with the land. They would see figures in the woods at night. My one client, she saw a shadow man standing in the woods, looks like wearing a hat. she found ashes in her back garden that she said suspiciously looked like it could have been a cremation. Now, to be fair, maybe someone who owned the house before her had a pet was cremated and put back there. But that disturbed her. But the real interesting part was the one good thing that the production company did is when they heard the story about bones being found on the one property, they brought out a ground penetrating radar team. They scanned the whole backyard and they found some very interesting things. They found 5 blotches in and around this area that the radar technician was convinced were burials. Also, in the middle of the whole property, in the middle of these burials was this large circle that took up most of the backyard. And it was a really interesting circle because it was a perfect circle. And then on one side, there looked like an arrow pointing, and it was pointing due north. And in the other side of it was like a fan coming out. So it was almost like an arrow going through a circle. Really intriguing. Unfortunately, the client, being so freaked out like she was too scared to excavate or dig to find out what it was. She just didn't want anything to do with it and left it alone. And to this day, whatever's there is still buried there, which is a shame. I would really like to know what's going on. They also mentioned that several other houses in the neighborhood all hinted at that they were experiencing activity, yet they're the only 2 that would come forth and really want an investigation. Nobody else wanted anything to do with it. They were ignoring it. So that whole area seemed to be a hot spot. Now, why are there hot spots like this? That is a very good question. There's a lot of different theories for it. There's what's known as the stone tape theory, which is a location could be active because of what's under the ground. Anything from the type of rocks or minerals under the ground, quartz, limestone, running water, granite, to to other types of things that could record like past events and play them out, like what they used to call residual hauntings. That wasn't intelligent. It was like watching a television program. And in those instances, again, I don't really subscribe to that theory. That's not saying there isn't something underground, but I think there is something on the land. I think that what we're dealing with is a couple of different things. In the case of Bloomingdale and in the case of Glenwood, Highland Lakes, all of these, whatever was happening there was intelligent. It was responding to us. It was the voices that we would capture, the whistling, the laughter, sounding like moving furniture. Something was in the house, was messing with the people there. I don't believe it was evil or demonic. I don't believe in demonic. I'll just say that right now. Don't believe in demons. Sorry, folks. I do believe that there are some entities that can be very negative, can do nasty things. But from a religious standpoint, no, I don't believe in demons. And I think what was on the land there had a kind of a trickster quality to it. And if you look at Native American lore and spirits, in fact, if you look at a lot of different older pagan type religions, even like Norse mythology, you have Loki, who's the trickster god. This is interesting. I'm having a lot of problems with my Audacity program recording today. It's been stopping and jumping and whatnot. Maybe it has to do with the subject matter today. Who knows? But anyway, I begin to think that there is a trickster quality. I was talking about God Loki in Norse mythology, but the Native Americans, especially those in the southwest of the United States, talk about coyote. In the Hopi and Navajo traditions, coyote was a trickster. spirit. And tricksters would do things on purpose to mess with your head. They weren't being evil, but they were being mischievous. Sometimes they would do it for a reason, to teach a lesson. Sometimes it was just to mess with you. Nobody really had a good understanding of why they would do that. And I feel that in a lot of these cases, especially here in my local area, we're dealing with a type of trickster entity or natural entities that are just beyond our perception. It could be interdimensional. It could be they could be very real, but have either paranormal or interdimensional properties, maybe going in and out of our reality. There are all the legends going back to Celtic mythology, and in Ireland, you have the leprechauns, you have the fairies, you have gnomes, you have in Iceland the Icelandic elves, and the elves. So many movies are shot over in Iceland. And one of the things they learned real quick is they had to do some prayers or make some offerings to the elves in order to have trouble-free movie shoots, because otherwise camera equipment would break, things would go wrong on the set and whatnot. So they had to appease the entities living on the lands where they were filming. They believe in the elves there in Iceland so much that where they think that they're living, these hills or whatnot. One time they were building a highway, and when they reached this hill, they built the highway around it so as not to disturb the land. They had that much respect for what's there. Now, most of the Western society rolls their eyes and thinks that's absolutely ridiculous. Well, that's our problem with modern society. We think that we're all being very scientific, that if it can't be run through scientific processes, it doesn't exist. And that's arrogance, because I think there are things that are beyond our science, beyond our modern physical ways of measuring activity and replicating it in a lab. Just because we can't do that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Especially when you're dealing with things that work on a paranormal, spiritual level, interdimensional level. We're kind of getting there. Science is starting to accept interdimensional, multiple planes of existence. String theory says that there are 11 different realities or different dimensions. And I think it's a lot more than that. I think that's just the few that they are willing to admit to at this point. Because when you start dealing with the spirit world, what is the spirit world? It's another plane of existence. I liken our third dimensional reality here to one frequency of a radio station. Now, there are many different frequencies going up and down the ladder, and you were only tuned into one station, yet all these other frequencies are happening at the same time. And all you have to do is change the channel, raise the frequency a bit, and then you're tuned into another channel. And I think what we call the quote-unquote spirit world is actually encompasses many different dimensions, not just one. There's a lot more going on there. We just don't understand it, so we all lump it in together as, say, the spirit world. Or if we look at lower vibrational beings, activities, locations, we think, oh, it's hell. You got heaven or hell, one or the other. And I think that there are a lot more based on, and I'm saying this based on eyewitness testimony from people who've had near-death experiences, to UFO experiences, to credible psychic mediums, and how they're able to tune in to different frequencies and realms. I deal with Irene, my co-host on the Paranormal UK radio show, and we don't talk about her background very often, but she's very sensitive and in tune to a lot of these different dimensions and frequencies, and has had many different experiences. There's the idea of multiple realities. Multiple versions of this same reality. There was a popular show, I believe it was in the early 90s, called Sliders, where this group kept jumping from different reality and reality into reality. Each one is the Earth in modern times, but every reality was different. In one reality, let's say the Nazis won World War II, there was something different with each one. And I think that that's actually very true. Whitley Strieber has talked about during some of his transcendental meditations that he has experienced, or he's experienced time slips or dimensional shifts, where he woke up one night and he walked into his living room and all of a sudden the whole living room was different. It was decorated differently, totally different layout. When he looked behind him, even going back into his bedroom, everything was different. He was in a completely different house, yet it was his house. It was all decorated differently. This lasted for a very brief period before everything turned back to normal. He had meditations where he actually saw himself in different realities, 3 or 4 different realities, and he was in different situations in his life. It's a wild theory to wrap your mind around, the idea that we could be living multiple lives at once, not just this life. It also makes the idea of past lives interesting, because when we talk about past lives, we talk about in a linear fashion, because we look at time from a linear straight line going from point A to point B. Point B is way out there in the future. And yet now science is proving, and a lot of metaphysics has looked at, that time is an illusion. Time is something that we measure, that all time is happening at once. If you didn't have that little clock in front of you telling you what time it was, if you didn't have the sun revolving, if you were in a sensory deprivation tank, you would lose all sense of time. People who go into caves or in caverns experience time differently. Even astronauts who go up into space come back and their clocks are at a different time, because time is moving differently. So if we're another example is Irene has had visions of talking with me, because we talked a lot these last few years, and I'm totally different. I'm a different version of me. In one version of me that she dealt with, I smoked. I've never smoked. I don't smoke. Never liked it. Never had any desire to smoke. Yet in one version of reality, that's where she talks to me, I smoke. Interesting. I've never personally experienced things like this, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, people's personal experiences, that shows that this does happen. And so it's really intriguing. There are other hotspots out there, real big paranormal high strangeness hotspots. One that's very popular right now in the public eye is Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. First in the 90s, the book came out. George Knapp and Colin Keller wrote The Hunt for the Skinwalker, about the ranch in northeastern Utah, in the Utah Basin, that family moved in and started having all sorts of strange activity, from paranormal to UFO type of activity, high strangeness, cryptid, Bigfoot-like creatures, strange lights. And some of it could be malicious. One ball of light came out and was floating around, and the ranchers' dogs chased it into the woods, and they disappeared in the woods, and all of a sudden they heard all this yelping and screaming and quiet. And this was at night, so he went out the next morning and looked, and where the dogs were 3 piles of goo. Whatever it was killed the dogs. The first night that they moved in, the first day they were there, and they had calves in the corral and the family standing there, and out of nowhere, here comes this wolf. And it was the biggest wolf anybody has ever seen. It stood almost chest high. It was insanely big, kind of like what used to be known as a dire wolf, which became extinct about 10,000 years ago. And this thing came up and was friendly to the family, and they were actually petting it, and it was really, really strange. And then like a shot, it shot over and grabbed the head of one of the calves and was trying to pull it through the through the corral. So the family were beating on it, and nothing was. This thing wasn't letting go. They grabbed guns and they started shooting at it, and finally, after a bit, it let go. They were shooting at point blank range, and this wolf acted unfazed, and then it started trotting off. Well, then the farmer, who's an avid shooter and hunter, pulled out his 30-06, which is a powerful gun, and he shot it, and he actually saw fur go flying, and this thing barely even reacted, just looked back at him and then started trotting off. They tried tracking it, and there was a little bit of blood. They tracked it. They saw the footprints. They got to a certain point, and then all of a sudden, the footprints just disappeared. The animal just vanished into thin air. Where did it go? And now there's this popular show on the History Channel called The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. And I'm really fascinated by this show because they have a team of scientists there on the ranch. Robert Bigelow from Bigelow Aerospace bought the ranch, and he had his scientific team on there for 20 years. And the activity went kind of dormant when they were there. Although some things did happen. They watched portals open up and creatures crawl out of the portals and run into the woods. They saw some UFO activity. One of the researchers heard a voice in his head saying, "We're watching you." Who's watching the watchers? But then after 20 years, Bigelow sold it to an entrepreneur, real estate entrepreneur out of Salt Lake City, Brandon Frugal, who decided to investigate the ranch, but made a deal to make it a television show where Bigelow was very secretive, and he kept anything that happened with his team, he kept most of it quiet to himself. And where here, Frugal is opening up to the world, and they're showing all the different scientific experiments that they're doing. And they've had a lot of interesting things happen on this show. I highly recommend if you want to check it out. They've gotten blasted with radiation to the point where it made a couple of the team members sick and gave them radiation burns, gamma ray radiation that came out of nowhere. They're detecting all sorts of different activity. They've seen UFO and filmed the UFOs up in the sky. They filmed strange lights lighting up the mesa behind the ranch. Paranormal types of activity. And it's something dealing with the Utah Basin. Again, something dealing with the land, and even the Native American who lived in the area. There's the Navajo and the Utes who were warring over that land, and they both talk about how strange that area is. There's my friend John Edmonds down in Phoenix. He has his Stardust Ranch, and it's a much smaller ranch, but he's had for 25 years since he's moved in all sorts of different activity, and he's written a book about it, which you can find if you want to hear more about it. You can look in our archives on the Paranormal UK radio show archives. We've interviewed John a couple of times to hear his story, so I won't go into it here, but he's had everything from like UFOs to attacks by what seemed to be gray aliens to paranormal activity. Ghost Adventures went out there and did an episode there, and they caught a lot of activity. And yes, I know a lot of you people don't like Ghost Adventures or think they're fake. I can tell they're not fake. I don't agree with their conclusions. I think they overreact sometimes, and they come at things from too religious of a standpoint. But no, I don't believe they're faking anything. So there are all these different hotspots that I think deal with interdimensional portals, with other types of entities that could be living on the land. There's so much about this topic I could talk about. And I'm sure in a lot of different states, a lot of different countries, there's the Haiobaciu Forest in Romania, where there's the big clearing in the middle of the forest that has a lot of activity. And several investigators and TV shows have gone out there, and they all have had strange experiences. There's the, I forget the name of the forest by Mount Fuji, they call the Suicide Forest, where Japanese people, if they're feeling despondent, go out into that forest and commit suicide. And it's something in that area is really, really charged. It could be past events can affect a location. Look at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It's 3.5 hours away from me. I've been there many times. I've captured some paranormal activity there, EVPs and some video. People have had many, many, many different sightings about things that happened with the battle. Now, there's a lot of different theories about why that's happening, and I think it could be the land. I could be an area of high strangeness that when the battle happened, there was so much energy there that it got intermixed with whatever is there on the land that reproduces and causes time slips. People see Union soldiers or Confederate soldiers doing Pickett's March coming across the field. Brad Kling, who was an investigator out of Texas, when he was young, was driving by. He filmed it with his video camera, and here's a group of Confederate soldiers marching across Pickett's Charge Field, and they found out, reenactors aren't allowed out there, and so they don't know who this was. There are lots of stories up on Little Round Top about reenactors who are standing there, and some old guy in Union uniform comes up and goes, "Here, boys, you'll need these," and hands them live rounds of ammunition. And then when they turn around, he's gone. And yet here they are with live rounds, which is illegal in the park, but strange stories that happen there. So again, that's my fascination, are these locations that seem to be hotspots, not just for paranormal activity. There's UFO activity too. There's the San Luis Valley in Colorado, which is a big hotspot for UFO activity, cattle mutilations. This is my interest. These are things that in future episodes, and even when I start back up doing some documentaries, getting back into my filmmaking, I'm going to start focusing on these areas here locally. When I get the chance, I'm going to try to hit some of these other areas that are out there. Now, I know I kind of went on a rant about all of this type of paranormal activity. I did also want to focus on kind of where we are right now, and I'm just gonna come out and say it, and I'm not trying to upset anybody or make anybody mad. You can feel free to disagree with me. All I ask is that if we disagree with each other, let's do it respectfully. I don't agree with half the country right now. I think there's a lot of insanity going on out there right now. People's opinions have shifted so extreme that and what we're dealing with right now with our country is just, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. But that's as far as I'm going to talk about that. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is we have to look at this from the bigger picture. We're dealing with a lot of crap going on here right now, and I have no idea where it's going to go. If it's ever going to get better, or if things are going to get worse before they get better. I don't like it. Nothing I can really do about it personally, other than to try to look at it from a spiritual perspective. I once had an opportunity when I was talking with somebody, and occasionally other entities would come through, channeled through this person. And one time when I knew I was talking with one of these entities, I asked them about all of these things that are going on and what's going to happen. And basically I was told this, to stop worrying about it, to let it happen, that we're all here to experience things, both good and bad. And basically, it's not even something that we have to endure or ride out. We're here to experience many different things on a spiritual level. And these things, these events that are going on right now, we chose to be here at this time. Before we came into this life, we came here knowing all of this was going to be happening. Now, I find that very frustrating because, I like to be in the know. I want to know what's going on. But yet, this is the human experience, and we're here to learn. And we learn from good, we learn from bad. But we could also set that example too. We could also look at things and look at it from a spiritual perspective. Stop getting upset. Stop pointing fingers, hating our fellow man. We may not like what some people are doing. We may not like their attitudes. We could totally disagree with them. And yet, a lot of this is being fueled, I feel. A lot of this is purposely being done to stir us all up, stir up emotion, stir up to gain more control over the rest of us, to gain more control of society. Look at all the freedoms that we have lost these last few years. I can even go back to like in the last 20 years, since 9/11, all of the freedoms we have lost. And we're losing more every day, and we're being mandated to do things that we don't want to do, or we may have questions about. And just because somebody asks questions doesn't mean that they're a kook. I'm not going to talk about vaccinations. I'm not going to talk about political parties. I'm just saying every person has a right to determine their own destiny, to have that free will. Now, sometimes governments will come in and take away those rights and privacies and free will. And that's not only happened now, it's happened in countries all over the world. Look at Nazi Germany, look at Stalinist Russia, look at, communist China, or any of the other communist countries around, where people's wills, free will and freedoms are taken away and you're being controlled by the state. Look at North Korea, biggest shithole on the planet, ruled by despots. And yet at the same time, sometimes we need to go through these things. And one or two things is going to happen. Either we die while all this is going around, things don't get better, we die, or things will eventually change. Now, dying, not a bad thing, because we're all spiritual people. It means that this experience that we're having here is done, and we go back home. So we take what we've learned from here. Now, do you want to take hate? Do you want to take, resentment, anger with you? Or do you want to live more in peace, live more in a spiritual perspective, and turn and listen to your own inner self, your higher self? Listen to what's inside of you, what it's telling you. Don't react automatically with fear and anger. I have to admit there that for several months, and it's part of the reason why I haven't really done this show, is I was in a very bad place. I was allowing everything happening now to really affect me. I was getting extremely upset and angry. And I had to learn that I had to take a huge step backwards to disassociate myself from everything that's going on. I still know what's going on. I still don't like it, but I don't get upset like I used to, because there's not much I can do as a person. And I have to look at it from a spiritual perspective. You have to look at it with having that faith, whether you're religious or not. It's having that faith in whether it's God, the creator force, great spirit, whatever you believe it is, even our own guides and protector spirits, that family, people that are there for us, all helping to guide us while we go through these experiences. We are here to experience things, and our reactions to those events will help define us, will help us learn. And I believe looking at things from a perspective of love, from a perspective of understanding, and not through hate and not through fear. I'm going to, even though I've admitted here before, I'm not a Christian. I used to attend church when I was younger, and then I moved off after high school, and I started learning a lot of different things. But yet I'm always kind of drawn back to Jesus and that biblical time. And even though I believe the Bible has been like rewritten and things changed, there's still a lot of truth in there, even though there's a lot of BS in there too. I mentioned, I think on my last show, I've mentioned on the other radio show, there's a show out there right now called The Chosen. which is the largest crowd-funded television show in history. It's 100% crowd-funded. It's not run by any studio. It's a Christian group that is doing it. But what I love about the show is that it doesn't feel like you're watching a religious program at all. It feels like the production values are excellent. The acting is excellent. The stories and the way it's written are fantastic. It feels like you're watching a real group of people going through a real interesting time. And the actor, Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus, oh, he's a hoot. You wouldn't think that Jesus was funny. This guy is funny. But he's also very human, the way they write him, very relatable. And I look at Jesus as a very powerful, intuitive psychic who was, some people might call him an ascended master. Do I believe he was the son of God? Well, I think we're all sons and daughters of God. We all come from the God source. I don't believe he was any more divine than the rest of us, but he was fantastically in tune as a psychic, as a healer. Because keep in mind, not only did Jesus do a lot of miracles, he had his disciples. They did a lot of miracles too. Now, how did they do these miracles? Because he taught them how. He taught them how to tap into these energies, how to tap into spirit, probably taught them various forms of meditation and techniques in order to have that faith in spirit, in order to do these things. And these things still happen today. There are people who can heal by touch. There are shamans who are able to touch into the spirit world and doing healings and whatnot, and doing many fantastic things. It wasn't just related to Jesus. And yet what I like about the program is it's not knocking you over the head with religion. Absolutely not. If anything, it really gets deep into the Jewish religion at the time. And because it goes in deep with the Sanhedrin and the priests, but even what the every common day people believed, which was all Judaism. And even Jesus, being a Jew, talks about, Judaism. And yet he starts talking about how he's shaking things up. He's bringing in, bringing people to look at things a new understanding. And it's very, very spiritual. So even if you're not religious, you could watch this show, and I know it touches me a lot because it talks about redemption. It talks about forgiveness. It talks about tapping in to that higher power. And I find it very, very intriguing, entertaining, watchable, funny, and yet it moves me. And like I said, I'm not a Christian. I'm certainly not going back to the religion or the church because there's so much about it I personally disagree with. That's just me. But I can relate to this program. And I think it's one of those things that right now can help us look at our lives in a different way and look at how we react to everything that's going on around us in a different way, and learn for us to come back together as a people, to stand up where we can and not, not accept what they're trying to make us do. I think if enough of us stood up and just said, no, we're not doing it, we could change things. I think we need to stop segregating everybody by race, by sexual orientation, by color, creed, whatever. We've so fragmented as a society when we need to remember we're one people. We're one human race. And we've forgotten that. And now everybody is off in their own little groups, all wanting to be special, all wanting to have their piece of the pie, instead of us all coming back together and working together. That's the one thing I disagree with what's happening with everybody. And so I'll do this show and I'll talk about things from my perspective and my experiences in the hopes that maybe it helps show people to start looking more within themselves. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I sure as hell don't. I'm learning as I go here too. I'm not an expert on anything. but I've had some experiences. I've had experience. I'll share that experience. You take it as you want. I'm sure you've all had your own experiences. Listen to those experiences, look at them, and look where your life is leading you, and look at what you can do. You have free will to do things with your life. It doesn't mean you have to sit back and take everything that's thrown at you. You can take charge of your life. You can move your life forward, but you can move it forward in a positive way. And be positive to those people around you. Be a good influence to those people around you. And let's help elevate everyone around us to get past all of this negativity. It may take a lot of time, but if we could change the mass consciousness of the human race, it can be done. There have been studies on it that's shown that it can be done. I'm not going to preach. I'm just stating some ideas and some opinions here. And I really wanted to talk also more about, being Halloween and like there's some horror movies and stuff coming out and other things more paranormal. I'm going to try to do another show here before Halloween, and we'll talk more about that. But I wanted to talk about these issues so far today. And then we'll see where we go from there. As always, I welcome your feedback and suggestions. You can reach out to me by email at mark@paukradio.com. You can find me on Facebook. Please feel free to contact me. Give me your feedback. Tell me if you hate my show. Tell me if you like my show. What do you like? What do you not like? Are there any topics you would want me to talk about? Because I'm well-versed in many different topics, and I'm willing to look at different points of view. So I want to interact with all of you. So please, feel free to contact me. I'd like to make this an open discussion rather than sitting here and listening to the sound of my own voice, which I hate. But I also do this show because I feel compelled to share things with people and to hopefully spark some conversation and some ideas. So that's where we're going to go from here. Anyway, thank you again for tuning in to another Astral Perception show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I will try to do these more often going forward. I'm not sure I can keep to an exact schedule, but I'll try to do at least a couple of these a month moving forward. I'm going to try to do one more of these here before Halloween, and it'll be more of a Halloween themed show. Anyway, thank you everybody. Have a great evening, morning, afternoon, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.